Welcome to Capital Conversations. It's Tuesday, April. We're still in April, aren't we? April 10th, 2012. I'm Marty Owings. Welcome to Capital Conversations. Ani Friedel has the night off. Tonight on the program, we'll hear from special guest former Governor Arne Carlson and get his take on the state of politics in Minnesota. As always, we invite you to participate in our interactive online political talk show. Just tweet us at MN Capital News or leave us a message on our Facebook page and we'll ask your question, talk about your thoughts on tonight's program. Well, without any further delay, we're pleased to be joined by the former Minnesota governor of the state, Arne Carlson, who served 2 terms as the state's chief executive from 1991 through 1999, 37th governor of the state. Welcome to the program. Welcome to the program, Governor. It's good to have you here.
I'm delighted, thank you.
Thanks. I know this was we planned this out a while back when it was the dead of winter, and I appreciate you coming down.
No, delighted.
Well, you've no doubt been following the legislature up here, Governor, as you remain active in politics. I know you're engaged. Can you talk about what you think the legislature should be accomplishing in a bonding year as we're in right now?
Oh, I'd be absolutely delighted. When the constitutional amendment for annual sessions was proposed, the original thought was, well, we should have one session where we review and provide some oversight as to what we did, how are our programs working, etc. It was not designed to get into massive passing of bills. And then the other idea was, well, we really shouldn't have a budget session and a bonding session at the same time because it inevitably leads to conflicts of interest. So why not put the bonding in a different year than the budget? Well, here we are, whatever it is, 30, 40 years later, and it's just another session that basically duplicates the primary session. So it leads a lot of people to say, why do we ever get into annual sessions?
Right.
And frankly, that's a very fair question. But what I would hope that a legislative body would do is, one, provide that kind of oversight. One, Minnesota has not had a properly balanced budget without all the accounting shifts and the massive borrowings for some 12 years. So we have a very serious financial problem. 2, we're headed for another deficit next year. It will approximate somewhere in the vicinity of $3 billion, depending upon the growth in the economy. And we've lost our AAA bond rating.
That's right.
So we have fiscal problems. And we really have no long-range financial plan. This would have been an excellent session for both sides and the governor to come together and say, how can we build? In this case, I would argue for a pro-growth budget. Develop a strategy working with the University of Minnesota, working with higher education, working with key economists and key people in the business community, and start to plan where are we going to create the jobs 5, 10, 15 years from now. You go to the University of Minnesota and they're heavily engaged now in stem cell research. We should be fostering more of that. We have the embryonic start, if you will, of a robotics. And we could become a robotics center, and that would be highly productive. We have to use our higher education system to train more people in advanced technology that leads to a higher level of manufacturing.
So you're saying invest in education versus what's going on now where they're borrowing and sort of kicking the can down the road.
Well, yeah, but I think in terms of education, we all have to pull back for a moment and realize that we have gone through systems that were built for the Industrial Revolution. We're now into a high-tech global revolution, and we have to start to rethink how we educate and prepare young people. And in order to do that, we've got to make some predictions on what the job climate, and not the climate, but what kinds of jobs are going to be available.
Where's the growth?
Yeah, exactly. And what kind of skill sets are going to be necessary. And then train accordingly and build partnerships with the private sector so that we train according to their needs. But too many of our political fights, our broad political fights, are based on how we fund yesterday's functions rather than preparing for tomorrow. So when you use the word invest, that's exactly right. Every educational system should be asked some hard questions. One is, how can we get more of our young people into higher education when we have skyrocketing tuitions? 2, the legislature has to examine the enormous sharp rise in the cost of administration. Those salaries have really gone up, well above that of the President of the United States. And we are in the public sector business, and we have to be very careful about that. The third thing is what I talked about before, the partnerships with the private sector, so that we are basically in sync. Those are some of the things that I would have hoped this legislative session could at least start on.
Well, Governor, I mean, you mentioned the student debt crisis as this looming next thing that nobody's focusing on.
Right.
What happens when a person graduates, a young person now with $75,000, $100 in debt? They're shackled. How do they get anywhere?
Well, it has a variety of negative effects. One is it's approaching $1 trillion, and that's an enormous debt nationally for our economy to assume. The second part is what you're talking about. Instead of going out and buying a house, you have to pay off the higher education costs. So this is a good time for the educational leaders to be challenged. Come up with some really thoughtful plans on how we can accomplish the same mission and do it at a far, far lower level of cost. It can be done, but the truth is none of us wants to break the egg for fear that we'll offend the status quo. And so there is a tendency for leadership to be very protective of the status quo and just hope that crises don't occur on their watch.
So is it the new normal, or is there a bubble there? And what's the answer, Governor? I mean, Republicans don't want to forgive that student debt. That's an obligation that you made to go to school. You should have to repay it. Yet on the other hand, are we saying the kids should be supporting the kind of bloated bureaucracy, in exceedingly high salaries of the administration? Where do you fall on that?
I think you start out by first asking the questions. I mean, I personally would like to know, why are administrative costs in higher education so much higher than in any other public service system that we have? I think it's a fair question. Maybe there's a good answer, but frankly, I haven't heard it. The second part is, what are your ideas relative to how we can lower the rate of growth? Wendell Anderson always used to say something that I thought was very, very correct, and that was that when his generation, which is my generation, when we were going through school, we could work in the summer, we could work during vacation time and stow away enough money to pay for our costs of higher ed. And I'd like to get us back to that formula. Then you can put on the table the questions you're raising, which is, can you forgive, etc. The truth is, we ought not to get ourselves in that pickle in the first place.
I don't know, Governor. I think that ship might have already sailed.
No, it has sailed. It has sailed, and I think you have to put on the table: is there some kind of a remedy that we can come up with that will take that into consideration? Yes.
You mentioned the financial tumble from deficit to deficit.
Right. That's all we do.
Well, what's the answer? What's going to stop that?
My heavens, leadership and guts. It's nothing to it. You have two choices. You either cut spending or raise taxes. And what we've done instead is borrow and put more state costs on local governments. You take a look at the property tax. In the 8 years prior to Governor Plenty, property taxes went up about $715 million. In 8 years under Governor Plenty, it is about $3 billion. That's not an accidental shift.
Yeah.
That's massive. So basically, on one hand, you're kicking the can down the future. On the other hand, you're shifting your obligations to other levels of government and then giving them lectures on how they should be more prudent.
So who owns it? Whose responsibility is it, or is it a collective
It's
problem?
right here.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Yeah. And that's where you see a failure in leadership.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we have to recognize as citizens that these people work for us, not vice versa. Mm-hmm. And they are our employees. And frankly, I'm distressed by the fact that there's no activity going on right now. If you're at that level of a session in the middle part of April, we should be going pretty close into nocturnal sessions.
Well, they all left for Easter break, and
Well, that's
get
quite
back.
an Easter break, isn't it?
It's an election year, Governor. They want to get back and
Well,
connect with
but
their.
let's be fair. Does the private sector take a week off?
Well, not too often.
Okay.
What about changes to the caucus system? We talked a little bit about that. You know, if you're going to change the political
Yeah.
environment, you say that basically it's the extremists that show up that make the platforms, huh?
Well, extremist is probably a strong word, but
Okay.
I'm being rather candid tonight.
Sure,
so
no, I'm good. It's good. I'm glad you're on.
we'll have fun.
All right.
No, the caucus system doesn't work. It's not representative of the totality of a body public.
Who's it leaving out, Governor?
It leaves out the big middle.
Okay.
And we are left out. There's no question about it. We're not welcome, frankly, anywhere. No, I'd like to see us get back to a primary system. And I think we have to realize that we live in a democracy. And let's not just talk about a democracy when it's convenient on the 4th of July. Let's talk about it every day. We should be increasing voter participation, not restricting it. We should be intelligently discussing public policy, including the tough choices, instead of kicking the can down to the future and to the younger generations. And thirdly, more than anything else, we should realize that democracies are fragile. And by that I mean they depend on coalition building. Compromise is absolutely essential. You cannot run a democratic society without compromise. I don't think you can have a successful marriage without compromise. I don't think you can have a successful family without compromise. How in the world did we ever get into the position where we allow one element of a political system to say that compromise is an evil?
I don't know, Governor. I'm stuck in it like you are.
Well,
I don't like it either.
I think we should
Yeah.
debate it instead of trying to avoid it. It's a very serious attack on the fundamentals of a democratic society.
Well, that's a good point you bring up. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the broad majority of reasonable thinking people that suffer under that
Absolutely.
in that situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let me get to that. I want to
right
get to
ahead.
that
You go right
because one of the things that I think was an unfortunate side effect of the recent gubernatorial race here, and you know, I talked to former candidate Tom Emmer, and he thought, I think I can say this publicly because I think he thought it was a mistake for the party to treat the Republicans who supported Horner in the way that they did.
Yes. No,
And why don't you talk about it, Governor Carlson? What
No,
happened?
I
Did you
think-
get a letter?
No, I read it in the paper.
Oh, they read it in the paper. They couldn't even send you a note.
Oh, well. I think the whole thing is childish. I really do. First of all,
Well, sure it is, but tell folks what happened.
Well, I frankly haven't got a clue what happened. Somebody got behind closed doors and said these people don't belong in the Republican Party.
They barred you for 2 years.
Is that right? Am I
Yeah,
barred for
you're
2
not
years?
allowed to go.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Well,
surprised you're
barred.
here. I'm surprised they let you in.
Life is hard, isn't it? No, but I think we have to get back to the realization that by law, we have empowered a two-party system in America and in Minnesota. We give them favored treatment. And as such, they have a responsibility to have a broad umbrella. Here in Minnesota, forget about whether you like or dislike, that's not the issue. You've had a total meltdown in the Republican Party. And right now, as I understand it, they're $2 million in the hole. Now, it's very hard to argue that your candidates are capable of financial management on a state and federal level when you can't even run the party finances. But much more importantly, that has to be corrected and corrected immediately. I'd like to see, one, a full, transparent audit done on how did this occur. One, where were the controls on the financial system? One person could not have done it. Where were the controls? And where was the supervisory authority? Who signed off on all this? And three, is it true that there were buddy-buddy contractual arrangements? If that's the case, that is immensely serious. And so I would hope that the county attorneys, whoever is in charge, somebody would take legal jurisdiction over it and do a full, thorough investigation.
Why isn't that happening, Governor?
That is a very good question. I truthfully don't know. I am genuinely perplexed. If this were the Heart Association or the Cancer Society, they'd be swooping in immediately. And I don't know why, because it's a political party. Frankly, it's been very quiet.
Well, you mentioned fear. Is that part of the issue? I mean, we can get into the media questions in a minute, but is
I
it
don't
fear?
know. I have no idea.
I see.
I have no idea. I'm genuinely perplexed. I'd like to hear an answer about it. But political parties solicit money from the public, and the public contributes. They have a right to expect that their investment, their gift, their donation is protected. And when it's not, you expect the law enforcement agencies to come in and dissect what took place, who's responsible, and then let's talk about who assumes responsibility for payback.
It's called accountability.
Accountability,
It seems simple.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Governor, let me ask you about the decision to allow corporate money into politics, and not just that, but that they don't have to disclose their contribution.
Well, it's very frightening. It's up to states to decide the disclosure part. I had been working on a bill, and I gather it didn't pass. I think there should be full, total disclosure on every single dollar that comes into the political
No matter who
system.
it's from, unions,
I don't care
individuals.
who I don't care who it's from. Two, on the corporate side, if corporations are going to be allowed to donate, it's imperative that governors and legislators begin to understand how does a corporation operate. First of all, the corporate structure is taking money from the shareholders and transferring that to a political cause. That, I would argue, is highly improper. No money from the shareholders should leave until it's been approved by the board of directors, which is elected by the shareholders. That's not a decision for the CEO. That's a decision for the board of directors. And they should be passing legislation that compels that donation, that gift, go through a duly elected board of directors, and the same thing on the labor side, so that it is representative of them. Once you do that, it's amazing how the dynamics will change.
And holding the elected official accountable for things that there was an anecdote from last session where they were proposing some wage changes, and one of the senators on the floor stood up and said, well, why can't we make those apply to the senators elected here as well? And the chamber went silent.
Is that right?
Governor. So
I'd like to see one bill passed
Yeah.
in Congress and here, and that is that all laws that we pass apply equally to us. I'm appalled at the exceptions.
too many, Governor.
Well, we just found that out with insider trading.
Yes, sir. Yes.
That is absolutely astounding.
Well, not to pick on the Republican Party, you've got some scandals going on this year. You've probably been following. It's been all over the news. What do you make of the whole Broadcorp thing? And everybody's kind of lawyered up in this building now.
Well, I think we have to be very candid about it. One, it is a disgrace. Because here, while you had this caucus talking about the sanctity of marriage, you had more mischief, more violations of the marriage contract taking place inside that caucus than you did with voter IDs. And yet we have a constitutional amendment on voter fraud. Well, I think we should have a constitutional amendment on the marriage contract inside the legislative bodies that pass all these constitutional amendments.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the constitutional amendments. Tell me a little bit about, this is what we call a pivot in the business. I'm sorry. But tell me a little bit about where you are on the constitutional amendments, Governor. There was a few up here this year being proposed, but the two out of the gate are the marriage.
It's 100% political. We all know that. It's designed on one hand to drive the voters out on the conservative side, and on the other hand to depress the other side from being able to participate in election. I do think, considering the opposition that's developed on the marriage amendment, I think the marriage amendment has a good chance of losing. On the voter ID, that is one that should lose. And it should lose on its lack of merit. One, as far as I know, we haven't had a problem. We haven't even had a scandal. As I indicated, we had more marital infidelity than we have examples of voter fraud. So let's not get carried away. Two, that's a legislative responsibility to pass a law. And if they feel that there is a problem in who can vote and when they can vote, then the legislature should object. That's the reason we have a legislative body. Utilizing the Constitution like this, I think is an absolute tragedy. I really, and I'm going to campaign very hard against both of them.
You will?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
When you were in office for those 10 years almost, what was the story, Governor, on amendments, constitutional amendments?
I frankly can't recall. If there were any, they were probably largely housekeeping.
Okay. Let's turn for a minute on a comment you made to me. I mean, we talked a little before the show.
I make a lot of comments.
You mentioned that the American politics is in a flight from substance.
Right.
Talk about what you mean when you say American politics are in a flight
Well,
from
all
substance.
you have to do is roll your mind for the past 6 months. You had all these Republican candidates running for public office, etc. The media is obsessed with the politics of politics. Who's going to win, who's going to lose. In that kind of a framework, where's the discussion on substance? The truth is that there isn't any. And it's all about the contest, it's all about the charge, countercharge, it's all about the explosive nature of politics instead of the substance of politics. Substance is what built this capital. Substance is what built this country. And this flight from substance has caused us, one, on the federal side, we don't even have a budget.
Correct.
It will be 3 years without a budget. That is an absolute appalling disgrace. Mm-hmm. Two, here in Minnesota, we have not properly balanced our budget without massive debt, etc.
And it's in the Constitution.
It's in the all
it says
the
we're
people
supposed to
talk
do
about,
it. Yeah.
For 12 years.
Right.
No, I would much rather have us elect more boring people to public life, but who are competent.
Yeah.
We cannot govern by slogans. We cannot govern by bumper stickers. Budgets are large, thick books. They require reading, they require analysis, they require discussion, they require debate. We should welcome dissent in our society instead of trying to squash it. We are not pushing up our best and our brightest. When I was basically of age coming into politics,
Yes.
I would have to say to some extent it was the latter part of Harry Truman, but it was really Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower. What a magnificent choice. Absolutely magnificent. Both parties said who represents the best that we have, and they gave us two extraordinary people. Do you know that Eisenhower was the last Republican president to balance the federal budget? Isn't that something? Now take a look today, and I probably shouldn't say this, I'll get in trouble for it. Can we honestly say today that we're putting up our best and our brightest?
I don't think you're going to run to a foul, Governor, if you say
Well,
we're
I'm not going to go much further. If I did, I would run afoul. But no, I don't think we can say that anymore.
I think a lot of the public would maybe agree with you.
And I think that's unfortunate. And I think we, the people, have a responsibility to take the opportunity to say, one, we're going to abolish caucuses. We're going for open primaries. And you know what? That's going to force the debate more toward the middle. And once you focus the debate toward the middle, you know what? You're now in the business of selling substance. And we need it.
Desperately.
Very desperately,
Yeah,
yes.
that's right. You said that the both parties seem to be alienating that vast portion of the middle of America. Where are we headed if we continue down that road? And is that even really representative of our electorate right now?
Well,
obviously it's not. So where are we headed?
Well, I obviously I have no ability to forecast where we're headed, but I fear this. That as long as we continue to postpone hard decisions and hard choices, an external event will occur. And it could be like Spain, it could be like Portugal, it could be like Italy, etc. But some financial external event will occur that will have a huge, huge impact on our economy. And then we'll all wake up and say, boy, am I surprised. But I think it's almost inevitable unless we attack the massive deficits that we continue to accumulate.
But
at
Governor,
least have a long-term plan for it.
Haven't we had that wake-up call with the housing crisis and the Wall Street bailouts and
Those
the
are
fat
minor,
cats?
very minor heart attacks, and I think we can say to a large extent we've overcome that. But the bigger picture is the fact that not only we can't but balance our budget, but we're not even close. We borrow roughly 40 cents on every dollar is borrowed. Anybody with an IQ that approaches room temperature knows that you can't continue on that very long. And I think what would have been helpful on the presidential side, I think President Obama made an horrendous mistake in not embracing the Bowles-Simpson report. That would have given him ownership of both the problem and the solution, and it was bipartisan, it was intelligent, and the amount of sacrifice was frankly minimal.
All right.
That would have given him a heavy position to have when he goes into a debate. The Republicans now will embrace the Ryan plan, and I give them credit. They at least have a plan. Obama is stuck basically with no plan.
Yeah. Well, you endorsed the president
Yes.
last time, and you mentioned that you probably won't be able to endorse the president again this time. What changed in those 4 years for you? What brought you to this enlightenment?
I think it's a very fair question, and I hope I can honestly answer it. My wife and I, frankly, felt that the best qualified on the Democrat side was Hillary Clinton, and she really got pilloried by the media. She really did. But the refreshing part about Obama was he came in with this sense of idealism, a universal appeal, and that Washington was going to operate in a vastly different fashion. That never occurred. The idealism literally left, and it became a more pedantic political administration. But I would have to say that the disappointment in not accepting Bowles-Simpson, that really disturbed me, because he appointed the commission, it was the right thing to do, and then he abandons it. I'm sorry, but of all the domestic issues, that was the biggest, and that was a huge disappointment. On the Republican side, I have serious problems on the social agenda.
I don't think you have Santorum to kick around anymore.
No,
did
he is.
Did he get out today?
But regardless of what happens, the truth of the matter is the Tea Party has now taken over the Republican Party, and they will dictate. And it's not a moderate position on all of the social issues. The idea that we could even discuss things like the personhood bill astounds me. And I'm fearful that could become law.
Well, and turning attention to the Democrats for a minute, the governor, or the president-governor, signed the National Defense Authorization Act, which basically said that a U.S. citizen could be now imprisoned without due process, habeas corpus. I mean, essentially suspending that for some reasons. What did you make of that? Were you disappointed? Or?
I'm truly not certain.
Okay.
I probably shouldn't comment on something I'm not
Fair
that
enough.
knowledgeable on.
Fair enough. Now, bringing it more locally here, and we were going to get to the media because you and I covered some ground on that today. I think cowardice is the word that comes to mind nowadays when you think of some of the corporate media that's out there that run around gravitating to the left or the right. You had a decent relationship with the press corps when they were up here. What's happened to it? What's wrong with the media today?
Oh, I think that's a wonderful question, and I hope I can give a fairly decent answer. Those of us in public office need the media. They are the third wheel, really, in how we operate government. I used to tell commissioners that when you make a decision, I want you to realize and picture in your mind that decision is on page 1, and how does it look? So don't come back to me with weak excuses. Well, that had a tremendous impact on people. It really did. I've heard so many stories about it.
Because the media was in the role of the watchdog.
Because the media was the watchdog, and that was very healthy. Any administration, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, whatever it may be, is going to get itself into some trouble. When you appoint so many people and you have so many people working for you, it's inevitable that something is going to go wrong. What the media does, the presence of the media, tends to keep all of your appointees and the governor himself all in line. So when you make a decision, you say, whoops, I'm afraid so-and-so. When I first came into the legislature, there were 2 reporters, Bernie Shellum and Steve Dornfeld. That was one of the best
Steve's
candidates.
still around.
I know.
Yeah.
But in those days, he was lean and hungry, and Bernie Shellum was lean and hungry. And believe me, did they keep us in line. I mean, there was no question about it.
Right.
And we flourished. Because then you could stay on the positive agenda.
Right.
And I would love to see the media come back to that. And I appreciate the fact that our newspapers are financially stressed out, et cetera. But There have to be other ways, because we need a strong written media. We need a strong investigatory media. We need hard questions asked at press conferences. And we cannot allow presidents, governors, or anybody else to control access to the public. They should be compelled, as the British system does, compelled to be public and transparent literally at all times.
Without that transparency, what happens, Governor? What, in your opinion?
Then you invite not only mishaps, but you invite tragedies. I thought John Dean wrote a book on the Nixon administration. And one of the things he made a very compelling point, and that is the more you air out a decision publicly, the better the quality of that decision. I think of the great debates we have with the Democrats, particularly on school choice. We had a whole summer of debate because I vetoed the education bill. I thought they handled the debate very fairly. They focused on substance. They focused on public policy. I think our people did the same thing. I think the public really benefited substantially. And I think the end result, which was a compromise, was a good piece of legislation.
Better public policy.
Much better public policy.
Lastly, Governor, before you leave us tonight, I want to ask you, what are you optimistic about? What do you look at and see around you that makes you feel positive or encouraged about our state and
I
our
think
country?
that's a very fair question. We have a remarkable way of stepping into a mud hole, but we also have an incredible ability to turn that experience into a positive, and we will do it. But we always have to be aware of the fact that we in public life, we are servants, not masters. We are servants. And I think that's the line that we have crossed, and I find that bothersome. But there's no doubt that, one, we can rebuild our economy. We in Minnesota have a tremendous opportunity to put together a pro-growth strategy and a pro-growth budget.
Governor, I want to thank you and the First Lady for coming by
It's
the
a pleasure.
Capitol
Thank
tonight
you.
and joining us tonight. It's wonderful to talk to you, and it's good to see you. Governor, you miss anything about this place when you were walking through tonight?
Well, you get nostalgic. I do
you?
remember where
Yeah.
I sat.
You do? Well, let's point it out.
It was the third seat up on the middle of the aisle.
Okay.
If I recall right, I had Henry Savacle on my left, and what a remarkably good legislator he was. And I had Doug Ewald with the best sense of humor in the world on my right.
We kept you in good humor.
Oh,
then,
he
I guess,
did.
yeah.
He was one. No, we had a wonderful time. Wonderful indeed.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you, Governor, and I wish you the best.
Well, you're very kind.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
coming.
much.
You bet.
Thank you. Good luck.
That's all we have time for tonight, folks. I hope you tune in again next week, where we'll have a couple of legislators facing off on issues of the day, of course, as we always do. We had production assistance tonight from Susan Miracle and Connor Malloy. Our associate producers were Matt Ealing and Catherine Loudenslager. I want to thank the Uptake for carrying us tonight as well, and KFAI Radio News and Dale Connolly for carrying the program as well. To all of you, a good night. We'll see you next week when Andy returns. Good night, everybody.